My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment. There is a story waiting for you, and perhaps you were meant to hear it today. Not because it predicts your future, but because stories have a way of revealing truths that our hearts sometimes overlook. Imagine, for a moment, that an archangel is watching from beyond the horizon of the ordinary world, quietly witnessing two souls whose paths have crossed more than either of them realizes. One heart spent the entire night searching for the courage to speak. The other continued through the darkness without knowing that somewhere, someone was rehearsing words they had been unable to say for far too long. This is that story. Last night did not unfold the way either of them expected. It began like countless evenings before it, with silence filling spaces where conversations once lived. Yet beneath that silence, unseen choices were being made. Memories long forgotten drifted back without warning. Regrets that had been buried beneath pride quietly returned. Questions that had been avoided for months suddenly demanded honest answers. If someone had looked at the night from the outside, nothing unusual would have appeared to happen. The streets remained quiet. The stars followed their familiar course. The world continued as though it were any other evening. Yet within a single heart, an invisible turning point had already begun. There are moments in every life when the greatest battles leave no visible trace. They happen behind closed doors, inside whispered prayers, unfinished letters, and thoughts that never become spoken words. Last night was one of those moments. The soul in this story found themselves standing between what was comfortable and what was true. Every excuse they had relied upon suddenly felt too small. Every reason for remaining silent became harder to believe. They realized that pretending everything was fine had become more painful than admitting what they truly felt. But what happened next surprised even them. A forgotten memory surfaced, not to bring sorrow, but to remind them of a promise they had quietly made long ago. It was a promise they believed had disappeared with time. Yet some promises do not vanish. They simply wait until the heart is ready to remember. As the night grew deeper, something unexpected happened. Not a miracle that changed the world in an instant, but a quiet realization that changed the direction of one person's heart. It arrived gently, almost unnoticed, yet once it appeared, nothing could be seen in quite the same way again. And still, they hesitated. Because truth asks something from us. It asks us to let go of the stories we tell ourselves about why we cannot move forward. It asks us to trade certainty for courage. It asks us to believe that honesty, even when difficult, is kinder than endless silence. That realization is where our story truly begins. You may wonder why this matters. You may even ask why this story found you today. The answer is simple. Sometimes another person's journey helps us recognize something hidden within our own. Their questions become mirrors for ours. Their courage reminds us of the courage we have been postponing. The night is over now. Morning has arrived. But the explanation has not yet been spoken. And when those long-hidden words are finally shared, they will reveal far more than anyone expects. The rest of this story begins with that conversation. My beloved child. The first light of morning crept across the horizon, but peace did not arrive with it. The one who had spent the entire night wrestling with their heart discovered that sunrise does not erase unanswered questions. Instead, it often shines directly upon them. Every quiet moment became a reminder that some conversations cannot be delayed forever. If you have stayed with this story until now, remain a little longer. Another piece is about to unfold. Sometimes the most meaningful turning points are not loud or dramatic. They begin with a single decision to stop running from the truth. In this story, the soul who had remained silent for so long looked back over every moment they wished they could relive. They remembered the words they never spoke, the kindness they assumed would always have another chance, and the distance that quietly grew while neither heart truly understood the other. Regret did not arrive to punish them. It arrived to awaken them. The archangel, standing only within this imagined story, watched with patient compassion. No force was placed upon either soul. No destiny was written in stone. Instead, each person was given something far more powerful: the freedom to choose honesty over fear. That freedom can feel overwhelming. It is easier to hide behind assumptions than to speak from the heart. It is easier to imagine what another person thinks than to ask them with humility. Yet every hour of silence built another invisible wall, and even the one who created it no longer knew how to climb over it. As morning unfolded, an unexpected memory returned. It was not the grand moments that came first. It was something simple. A smile that once made an ordinary day unforgettable, a conversation that ended with laughter, a promise to always value truth even when it was difficult. Those small memories carried a surprising weight because they reminded the heart of who they had hoped to become. The realization was impossible to ignore. The explanation for last night was not only about what happened. It was about what had been hidden beneath the surface for much longer. Fear had disguised itself as patience. Pride had disguised itself as strength. Silence had disguised itself as protection. Now every disguise was beginning to fall away. The heart in this story quietly whispered, "If I wait any longer, I may lose the chance to say what should have been said with kindness." Yet uncertainty remained. What if the conversation was misunderstood? What if the apology arrived too late? What if the other person had already begun a completely different chapter of life? Questions surrounded every step forward, but one truth became impossible to deny: avoiding the conversation would answer nothing. The imagined archangel did not promise an easy outcome. Instead, the message carried a gentler wisdom. Courage is not measured by knowing how everything will end. Courage is measured by taking one honest step even when the ending cannot yet be seen. That thought changed everything. Instead of rehearsing perfect words, the heart decided to begin with sincere ones. No dramatic speeches. No impossible promises. Only truth. And sometimes truth, spoken with humility, is more powerful than 1,000 carefully crafted explanations. As the hours passed, another surprising detail emerged. Last night's events had not only changed one person. Unknown to them, the other soul had also spent the night reflecting on moments they could no longer ignore. Both hearts were standing at different windows, looking toward the same sunrise, unaware that each believed they were carrying the burden alone. Neither knew the other had been awake. Neither knew the other had been hoping. Neither knew how close they were to finally replacing assumptions with understanding. The story pauses here for a reason. There is still one piece that has not been revealed. The explanation itself has not yet been spoken. And when those first honest words finally leave trembling lips, they will uncover something neither soul expected to discover, not about destiny, but about the quiet strength that grows whenever compassion is chosen over fear. That conversation is about to begin. My beloved child. Before the first word of explanation could be spoken, there was another moment of silence. Not the kind of silence that separates people, but the kind that gathers courage. There are pauses that carry more meaning than entire conversations, and this was one of them. It was the final breath before honesty finally found its voice. Stay with this story a little longer. The next few moments will reveal why last night could never simply be forgotten. Every unanswered question has been leading here, and every quiet emotion has been preparing for what comes next. The heart that had carried so much uncertainty realized something unexpected. The greatest weight was not the mistakes of yesterday. The greatest weight was pretending those mistakes had never mattered. Once that truth settled deep within, fear slowly lost its grip. The imagined archangel watched without interrupting. In this story, heaven does not force hearts to change. It simply shines light on paths that have always been there, waiting to be noticed. Every person must still decide which direction to take. The message finally began with words far simpler than expected. I need to tell you what happened. Nothing dramatic followed immediately. There was no perfect speech waiting to impress anyone. Instead came honesty, slow and careful, like someone learning to trust their own heart for the first time. Last night I stopped pretending everything was fine. Those words carried more power than they seemed. For months, perhaps longer, every smile had hidden uncertainty. Every delayed reply had hidden hesitation. Every quiet goodbye had concealed thoughts that never found the courage to become conversations. Last night, all of those hidden pieces rose to the surface at once. There are evenings that quietly divide life into two chapters, everything before them and everything after them. Last night became that kind of evening. The story reveals that nothing extraordinary happened in the outside world. There were no impossible signs in the sky. No mysterious voices echoed through the night. Instead, something beautifully human unfolded. A heart became tired of carrying unspoken truth. That realization transformed everything. The explanation continued. I kept telling myself there would always be another day to explain. Another day to apologize. Another day to be honest. The words slowed. But another day is never guaranteed in our hearts. Sometimes we lose opportunities long before we lose time. The silence that followed was different now. It no longer felt heavy. It felt hopeful. Across the story, the other soul listened without interruption. They were not searching for perfect answers. They were searching for sincerity. And sincerity, even when imperfect, has a way of reaching places polished words never can. The imagined archangel smiled gently, not because every problem had disappeared, but because truth had finally entered the room. Healing often begins long before every question is answered. It begins the moment honesty replaces fear. Yet another mystery remained. There was still one part of last night that had not been shared. The storyteller paused, looked toward the morning light, and quietly admitted, "There is one more reason I needed to explain everything." Those words changed the atmosphere completely. Every memory from the previous night suddenly seemed connected to something deeper. Every hesitation pointed toward a single hidden moment that had not yet been described. The listener's heart began to wonder. What happened after midnight? Why had that forgotten moment become impossible to ignore? Why had it taken until today to find the courage to speak? Questions filled the silence once again, but this time they carried hope instead of fear. The imagined archangel offered one gentle reminder through the story. Sometimes the answers we seek arrive one layer at a time because our hearts need time to receive them. If every truth appeared at once, we might overlook the quiet wisdom hidden inside each step of the journey. So the story continues. The explanation is not finished. The most meaningful part of last night has still not been revealed. And when that final memory is spoken aloud, it will reshape everything both hearts believed they understood. Not because it changes the past, but because it finally reveals the truth that the past had been quietly protecting all along. That hidden moment is waiting just beyond the next page of this story. My beloved child. The morning continued to unfold, yet one memory refused to fade. It returned again and again, not as a burden, but as an invitation to look more closely. Some moments seem ordinary while we are living them, only to reveal their true meaning when our hearts become quiet enough to understand. Last night held one of those moments. If this story has found you today, remain with it just a little longer. The next part is not about dramatic signs or impossible events. It is about the quiet turning point that can change an entire journey. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins with a single realization that almost went unnoticed. The one who had been carrying so many unspoken thoughts finally admitted that they had spent far too much time trying to predict every possible outcome. They imagined conversations that never happened. They feared responses that had never been spoken. They built walls against disappointments that had never arrived. By the end of last night, they understood something profound. Fear had been writing stories that truth had never confirmed. In this fictional tale, the archangel remained nearby. Not to decide anyone's future, but to remind every searching heart that wisdom often grows in stillness. There was no command from heaven, no promise of what tomorrow would bring. Only a quiet encouragement to choose honesty, kindness, and courage over endless assumptions. As the memory unfolded, another detail became clear. The hidden moment from last night did not happen during a conversation. It happened after one. When everyone else had moved on and the world had grown quiet, the soul in this story found themselves sitting alone, replaying every word they had spoken and every word they had left unsaid. That silence became a mirror. It reflected not only regret but also hope. For the first time, they stopped asking, "What if everything goes wrong?" and began asking, "What if the truth deserves a chance?" That single question changed the direction of the entire night. The imagined archangel watched as fear slowly gave way to humility. There was no instant solution, only a steady willingness to become more honest than before. Sometimes that is how healing begins, not with certainty, but with the courage to take one sincere step. Another memory surfaced. There had been a message that was written, then erased. Written again. Erased once more. Not because the words were untrue, but because they felt too vulnerable to send. Every sentence carried a piece of the heart, and the heart was afraid that once those words were shared, there would be no way to hide behind silence again. Hours passed. The message remained unfinished. Yet something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling relieved for staying silent, the heart felt even heavier. It became impossible to ignore the growing realization that silence had never been the safe place it seemed to be. It had simply delayed the conversation that needed to happen. That realization became the true explanation for what happened last night. It was not one event. It was many quiet moments joining together until they became impossible to overlook. Every memory. Every hesitation. Every unanswered question. Every unfinished sentence. Together they formed the turning point. The fictional archangel's voice in this story seemed to whisper through the stillness, reminding every listener that understanding rarely arrives all at once. It comes gently, one truth at a time, allowing the heart to grow strong enough to receive what follows. Then came another unexpected discovery. The other soul, the one who knew nothing about the unfinished message, had also experienced a restless night. They, too, had wondered whether silence had lasted long enough. They had questioned whether kindness should finally replace uncertainty. Though neither knew what the other was thinking, both hearts had arrived at the same quiet crossroads. The storyteller paused. Could two people, separated by distance and uncertainty, reach the same realization without knowing it? The answer remained hidden. Not because it was impossible to reveal, but because some truths carry greater meaning when discovered step by step. The heart that had remained silent finally made one simple promise before the sun climbed higher into the sky. No more pretending. Those 3 words carried no guarantee of how the future would unfold. They were not a promise that every wound would disappear or that every misunderstanding would instantly be resolved. They were simply a commitment to stop allowing fear to speak louder than sincerity. And sometimes that is where a new chapter truly begins. Yet one final piece from last night still remained untold. It was the smallest moment of all. So small that anyone else would have overlooked it. A glance toward the night sky. A quiet breath. A single sentence whispered when no one else was listening. That sentence was never meant for another person. It was spoken only to the silence. But in the next part of this fictional story, those whispered words will reveal why the events of last night became impossible to forget, and why they marked the beginning of a journey that neither heart could have imagined. The story is not finished. The quietest moment of the night is still waiting to be revealed.